Many people, when opening the Bible for the first time, come across a reality that is hard to accept. Biblical characters owned slaves. In Exodus, there are laws about how to treat servants. In Leviticus, there are specific rules about the slavery of foreigners. Even the Apostle Paul, in his letters, does not directly condemn this practice, but instructs servants to obey their masters. And this raises an uncomfortable yet necessary question. Why did God allow slavery in the Bible? If God is just, if he is love, why would he tolerate a practice that today we see as inhumane, cruel, and immoral? This question echoes in the minds of many modern readers and must be faced with courage, depth, and faith. Before we rush to judgment, we must remember something fundamental. The Bible is not a book invented by men to paint an ideal world. It is an honest record of humanity's history in relation to God. And that history is marked by falls, corruption, wrong choices, and paths far from the original plan. The first thing we need to understand is that slavery mentioned in the Bible did not come from God's heart. Just like polygamy, war, and idolatry, it is a consequence of a broken world. A world where human beings chose to live according to their own will rather than obey the Creator's principles. When we look at Genesis, we see God's ideal for humanity, a man and a woman living in freedom, without oppression, domination, or violence. Adam was not the owner of Eve. Eve was not Adam's property. They were partners, caring for creation together. There was no slavery in Eden, no masters, no servants. God's plan was entirely different. But when sin entered the world, everything became distorted. Cain killed Abel. Lamech sang of revenge, and within a few chapters, we already see societies built on strength, domination, and inequality. Slavery, unfortunately, is born from this fallen context. But when sin entered the world, everything became distorted. Cain killed Abel. Lamech sang of revenge, and within a few chapters, we already see societies built on strength, domination, and inequality. Slavery, unfortunately, is born from this fallen context. The deep truth is that the Bible is not a book that hides the ugliness of the world. It exposes it. It denounces it. It shows without makeup how humans act when they are distant from God. And what is most impressive is that even in that scenario, God does not abandon humanity. He enters the story. He relates to people who are still learning, still repenting, still discovering who he is. And it is within this context that laws like those in Exodus and Leviticus appear. Not to promote slavery, but to limit evil, to protect the most vulnerable within a system that already existed. God, as a patient father, educates a people who are still immature. He does not transform society overnight, but begins molding hearts little by little. That is why, even though slavery existed in the Old Testament, it was different from the brutal and racist practices we know from modern history. The Hebrew slave had the right to rest. He could be freed in the 7th year. He was not to be treated cruelly, and above all, he was recognized as a human being, not as property. When we look at the pages of biblical history with attentive eyes, we see that God never approved of one human being dominating another as part of his ideal. He simply acted with mercy within the reality that men themselves had created. The proof of this lies in how God delivered the people of Israel from slavery in Egypt. It wasn't a symbolic act. It was a cry for justice. It was God himself descending into human suffering, hearing the cry of the oppressed and intervening with power to pull them out of bondage. And here is something we must understand with our hearts. The God of the Bible is not an accomplice of slavery. He is the liberator. When Moses meets God in the burning bush, what he hears is not a message of resignation, but of movement. I have seen the affliction of my people, and I have come down to deliver them from the hands of the Egyptians. When Moses meets God in the burning bush, what he hears is not a message of resignation, but of movement. I have seen the affliction of my people, and I have come down to deliver them from the hands of the Egyptians. This is God's heart, a God who hears, a God who acts, a God who fights for those without a voice. Even if some laws of the Old Testament seem cold to our modern eyes, they existed as brakes to limit abuse in a culture still learning how to be human. It was a process. one step at a time. And those who walk with patience know that not every structure is torn down overnight, but rather through small cracks that, over time, bring down even the strongest empires of injustice. That is why, when we reach the New Testament, something changes radically. Jesus enters the scene and brings new light to human dignity. He didn't come to lead political revolutions, but each of his actions was a spiritual revolution. He touched lepers, spoke with Samaritans, defended women. And even though he didn't deliver direct speeches against slavery as a system, he planted seeds that would destroy that soil forever. When Jesus says, "Do to others what you would have them do to you," he is not just offering a moral lesson, he is destroying the logic of slavery at its root. Because once you see another as your equal, as God's image, as your brother, you can no longer treat them as property. The Apostle Paul, who many accuse of not condemning slavery, was actually one of the deepest instruments of that transformation. In his letter to Philemon, he sends Onesimus, a runaway slave, back to his master, but with a clear demand that Philemon receive him no longer as a slave, but as a beloved brother. The Apostle Paul, who many accuse of not condemning slavery, was actually one of the deepest instruments of that transformation. In his letter to Philemon, he sends Onesimus, a runaway slave, back to his master, but with a clear demand that Philemon receive him no longer as a slave, but as a beloved brother. That was more than a personal favor. It was a silent rupture with the system, a gospel seed thrown into hearts hardened by custom. A revolution that began small, but which echoed through time and inspired voices like Wilberforce Harriet Tubman and Martin Luther King. People who rose with the same spirit of Christ to proclaim, "No one is a slave when they were created to be free." Now I want to invite you with all kindness. If you've made it this far, it's because something inside you is also yearning for truth. So if you haven't yet, click the subscribe button now. Not out of obligation, but because you want to walk this journey of deep discovery with us. Turn on the notification bell and stay with us in every step. And tell me in the comments, what part of this story touched you the most? What surprised you the most about this explanation? I truly want to hear and interact with you. The truth is, many people still look at the Bible expecting to find a manual of perfection, but God did not give us a book of fiction or utopia. He gave us a mirror that often reflects open wounds, grotesque mistakes, and choices that make us shudder. But that same mirror reflects above all the patience of a God who walks alongside a stubborn people, a God who never gives up, a God who loves, even when the world seems no longer worthy of love. The truth is, many people still look at the Bible expecting to find a manual of perfection, but God did not give us a book of fiction or utopia. He gave us a mirror that often reflects open wounds, grotesque mistakes, and choices that make us shudder. But that same mirror reflects, above all, the patience of a God who walks alongside a stubborn people, a God who never gives up, a God who loves, even when the world seems no longer worthy of love. And here lies the key that many have yet to notice. God allowed slavery to be recorded in the Bible not to teach it, but to overcome it. He wanted us to see how the human heart, apart from Him, becomes corrupted, how culture can normalize sin, and how He, with patient and steady hands, molds us over centuries until we can finally see what He has always seen, that everyone has value, everyone is free, and everyone is His child. But perhaps the most surprising part of this story is not in the human characters. It is in Jesus. The Son of God, the only one who had every right to reign, chose to come into the world and become a servant. Yes, a servant. The one who washes feet, the one who carries the cross, the one who, though Lord, gives Himself. Philippians says He emptied Himself, taking the form of a servant, being obedient to death. The gospel is good news and a call to transformation. And the most incredible part, He did this out of love. For you, for me, for all who, at some point in life, have felt trapped by something. whether visible chains or invisible ones. He became a servant so that we could be set free. No wonder the gospel is called the good news, because it announces freedom for the captives, it heals the brokenhearted, it opens the eyes of those blinded by tradition, it transforms the ones holding the whip into brothers and the ones in chains into sons. When Jesus rises again, he doesn't destroy empires with a sword, but with forgiveness. He doesn't impose change by force, but by the Spirit. And that's what changes the world. Love that doesn't dominate, but transforms. Through this love, every oppressive structure begins to collapse. Every form of slavery loses its meaning. Every soul finds rest. So when someone asks you, why does the Bible talk about slavery? You can answer with conviction, because it shows what we are without God, and what we can become with Him. It reveals how, even amid shadows and injustice, the light of truth began to grow until it shone fully in Christ. And that light is still burning today within me, within you. Every time we choose goodness over power, every time we see a brother instead of a servant, every time we let Christ set us free on the inside so we can also be liberators on the outside. May this message stay in your heart as a good seed. May it grow, blossom, and bear fruit of compassion, empathy, and faith. And may you never read the Bible the same way again. Because now you know there are hard stories in it, yes, but they are not there by accident. They're there to teach us not to repeat them. They're there to show us how deeply we need God and how willing He is to walk with us until every chain falls. If this message spoke to your heart, share this video with someone who also needs to hear it. And remember, here on this channel, every Bible story reveals more than ancient facts. It reveals the living hope of a God who transforms.